Imagine Caracas in the early 2000s, a city throbbing with the rhythm of prosperity, its skyline a testament to an unprecedented boom. Towering skyscrapers kissed the clouds, reflecting a nation buoyant with seemingly limitless oil wealth, its veins coursing with the world's largest proven reserves. A collective euphoria took hold as petrodollars financed ambitious social programs, promising universal health care, education, and housing for all, transforming daily lives. It felt like an irreversible ascent, a golden era where national sovereignty was celebrated, and radical wealth redistribution seemed not just possible, but an inherent right. Families gathered, discussing futures brimming with opportunity, convinced that the foundation beneath their feet was unshakable, built on an endless wellspring of black gold. The air itself hummed with optimistic certainty, a belief that Venezuela had finally unlocked the secret to permanent welfare, insulated from the harsh realities faced by lesser nations, a promise whispered from every corner. This was not fiction, it was consequence. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this analysis from? Your perspective helps us understand the global reach of these lessons. That palpable optimism, that pervasive sense of security, wasn't accidental. It was carefully cultivated, built upon a powerful collective illusion. Citizens were led to believe that oil wealth was an inexhaustible resource, a perpetual shield capable of insulating Venezuela from global economic realities and sustaining any policy choice, no matter how audacious. This fostered a deep, almost ingrained dependency on the state, where the government became the ultimate provider, seemingly capable of guaranteeing a permanent state of welfare without the imperative for productive diversification or sound fiscal management. Market mechanisms, once considered essential, began to seem irrelevant, replaced by the comforting notion that the state could perpetually spend its way to prosperity, defying economic gravity. This was the unspoken promise, the bedrock of a society convinced its future was perpetually secured by the vast underground ocean of crude. You are about to witness the unraveling of a nation from the inside out, a story that demands your full attention. This isn't merely a tale of economic misfortune or the convenient scapegoat of external sanctions. What you will discover is the chilling truth. Venezuela's profound collapse under Nicolás Maduro was not an accidental crisis, but the inevitable consequence of a deliberately constructed model. We will reveal how political control, state capture, and ideological purity were systematically prioritized over economic productivity, institutional integrity, and market principles. This is why few speak about it with such clarity. It exposes a universal pattern, a dangerous blueprint for how a nation can engineer its own destruction, step by agonizing step. Prepare to see the mechanisms that dismantled the very foundations of stability, leading to hyperinflation, chronic scarcity, and a mass exodus. If you want to understand the deeper forces shaping our world, the ones nobody explains until the end, then subscribe to this channel now and join a community that seeks truth beyond headlines. To grasp the magnitude of this engineered destruction, you must first understand the system that existed, or at least appeared to exist, before its critical failure. In the early 2000s, Venezuela's state-centric economic model, flush with petrodollars, seemed to embody a powerful promise. It worked because the global commodities boom provided an unprecedented inflow of cash, enabling extensive social programs that directly benefited a vast segment of the population, from healthcare to subsidized food. The implicit promise was clear. The state would provide, security was guaranteed, and prosperity was a collective right, not merely an individual achievement. This model fostered a sense of national unity and a belief in a unique Venezuelan path, where oil wealth would insulate the nation from external shocks, offering a seemingly stable and predictable future for millions who tied their hopes to this grand, state-led vision. In that era of seemingly endless possibility, you would have found Elena Rojas. At 45, she was a mid-level engineer, her days filled with the purposeful hum of machinery at a thriving private manufacturing plant. Her hands, skilled and precise, helped craft components that fueled industries across the region. Elena's routine was a testament to dedication. Early mornings, meticulous work, and the satisfaction of seeing tangible results. She took immense pride in her professional contributions, a feeling rooted in the belief that her expertise directly contributed to her country's progress. For Elena, like countless others, the future was a clear path. Continued hard work, professional growth, and the quiet assurance that her efforts would translate into a stable, secure life for her family. A predictable trajectory of upward mobility. Elena embodied the aspirations of a burgeoning middle class. University educated, she had been raised with the ingrained conviction that meritocracy was the bedrock of society, that diligence, skill, and ethical conduct were the non-negotiable keys to progress and security. Her central human value was stability, a profound belief that a well-planned life, anchored in hard work and sound financial decisions, would invariably yield a prosperous future. From her perspective, the system functioned precisely as it should. Effort begot reward, and foresight ensured safety. Yet, beneath this veneer of predictability, a subtle, almost imperceptible fragility lurked. This seemingly robust system, so deeply intertwined with the fluctuating fortunes of oil, rested on assumptions that had never truly been tested. A silent vulnerability waiting for the right moment to surface and shatter the illusion. The initial shift wasn't a sudden cataclysm. It arrived cloaked in the noble garb of national sovereignty and economic justice. You saw the government, buoyed by the seemingly endless flow of petrodollars, embark on a path of aggressive nationalizations and stringent foreign exchange controls. These were presented not as radical experiments, but as essential measures to protect the nation's wealth from external predation and internal speculation. The argument was compelling. Why allow private entities to control strategic industries, or permit capital to flee the country when its resources could directly fund the people's welfare? This vision resonated deeply, promising an insulated economy, a bulwark against global market whims, and a direct pipeline of oil riches to every Venezuelan home. It felt like a reclaiming of destiny, a proud assertion of independence in a complex world. The public narrative painted a picture of a proactive state, bravely combating the invisible hand of the market, which, it was argued, only served a privileged few. These policies, you were told, would democratize wealth, ensuring that the vast oil reserves truly belonged to everyone. Initial social programs, expanded by these newly reclaimed resources, did indeed provide tangible benefits, from healthcare to education, reinforcing the idea that this was the correct, even morally superior path. There was an immediate surge in popular support, a collective sigh of relief that the nation's future was now firmly in its own hands. Who could argue against controlling one's own destiny, especially when the immediate dividends were so visible, so comforting? It seemed like a logical progression, a necessary evolution to secure a truly equitable society. Yet, beneath this veneer of national purpose, a silent mechanism began to grind. The foreign exchange controls, intended to prevent capital flight, became a suffocating chokehold on the very private sector they claimed to protect. Access to foreign currency, vital for importing raw materials and machinery, was no longer a market function but a political allocation, riddled with bureaucracy and opaque decision-making. Nationalizations, while celebrated as acts of sovereignty, systematically dismantled property rights and removed all incentives for investment or innovation. The state, rather than fostering a diverse economy, began to inadvertently create an artificial one, where success depended not on productivity, but on proximity to state-allocated dollars. This wasn't an error whispered in boardrooms. It was a structural shift, slowly eroding the foundations. This creeping paralysis soon reached Elena's world. Her thriving manufacturing plant, a hub of precision and productivity, began to falter. Orders for critical imported components, once predictable, now faced unpredictable delays, or simply vanished into the labyrinth of exchange controls. The machines that hummed with purpose started to fall silent, one by one. Production scaled back, then halted. Elena, a woman whose life was built on meticulous planning and tangible results, watched with growing unease as the gears of her professional life seized up. She still believed in her country, in the promise, but the tangible reality before her eyes began to contradict the official narrative. The system, once a reliable engine, coughed and sputtered, revealing a nascent, unsettling fragility. Have you ever witnessed a system, once seemingly robust, begin to unravel due to decisions made with seemingly good intentions? Share your thoughts below. These stories are critical, and if you want to understand how seemingly correct choices can lead to profound, long-term consequences, subscribe to our channel and join us as we dissect the silent ruptures that reshape nations. The inevitable arrived, not with a bang, but a whimper. Elena's plant, starved of essential imports and investment, closed its doors permanently. The stable engineering job, the bedrock of her family's security, vanished overnight. For Elena, this wasn't just a job loss. It was a direct assault on her foundational belief in meritocracy. She had done everything right, studied, worked diligently, saved responsibly. Yet the system had delivered not progress, but precarity. And then a more insidious threat began to materialize. Her hard-earned savings, once a bulwark against uncertainty, started to melt away, victims of a devaluation that felt like theft. The future she had meticulously planned was dissolving, not due to personal failure, but due to forces she couldn't comprehend or control. The initial narrative of temporary adjustments or external sabotage began to ring hollow. For Elena, and millions like her, the problem wasn't a fleeting hiccup. It was a fundamental shift in the very fabric of their economic reality. The promise that hard work would lead to reward, that skill would guarantee progress, was breaking down. The state, in its pursuit of absolute control, had systematically choked off all other productive avenues, making the entire nation singularly vulnerable to the very fluctuations it claimed to insulate itself from. The economic gravity that Venezuela believed it could defy was beginning to assert its undeniable force, pulling everything down, slowly, inexorably. The system no longer delivered what it promised. It consumed. This erosion wasn't merely economic. It was a profound psychological shift. The predictability Elena had always relied upon, the quiet assurance that tomorrow would resemble today, began to crumble. The feeling of structural injustice gnawed at her. Her efforts, her expertise, her lifelong dedication now seemed irrelevant in a system that prioritized political loyalty over productive capacity. The rupture between merit and reward became a gaping wound, leaving her questioning the very rules she had lived by. This was the silent, agonizing betrayal that permeated daily life, a constant battle against despair that stemmed from a deeper, more unsettling realization. The future she had envisioned for her children, built on her own stable foundation, was now floating adrift, unmoored from reality. What you are witnessing is not a sudden collapse, but the meticulous, almost surgical dismantling of a nation's productive capacity, disguised as a noble pursuit of sovereignty. These early decisions, seemingly rational in their intent to redistribute wealth and assert national control, were in fact planting the seeds of an engineered destruction. They were the first, almost imperceptible cracks in the dam, allowing the corrosive forces of central planning and political opportunism to seep in. The system, once seemingly robust, was now being hollowed out from within, under the guise of strengthening it, leading Venezuela down a path from which retreat would soon become impossible, and the true cost would be paid by generations to come. The initial, almost imperceptible shifts had now morphed into an undeniable economic blizzard. As global oil prices plummeted, revealing the inherent fragility of a mono-economy, and internal mismanagement at PDVSA, the state oil company deepened. The Maduro regime made its fateful move. They doubled down, tightening controls further, resorting to the desperate measure of printing money to mask colossal deficits and artificially sustain social programs. This wasn't a solution. It was an accelerant. Hyperinflation, a silent predator, began to devour the nation's wealth. Importing any essential good became prohibitively expensive, crushing what little local production remained. Chronic scarcity of basic necessities, from food to medicine, stopped being an abstract threat and became the brutal, inescapable reality of daily life for every Venezuelan. This economic gravity, once dismissed, was now pulling everything down. The consequence was a surreal economic schizophrenia. The official exchange rate, a fiction maintained by decree, became completely detached from any semblance of reality, a ghost of a price that nobody could access. Simultaneously, a thriving black market emerged, a shadow economy where real prices were set and illicit fortunes were forged, often by those with political connections. The state, once the benevolent provider, morphed into the sole allocator of scarce foreign currency, transforming every transaction into an opportunity for corruption and patronage. PDVSA, once the pride of the nation and its economic engine, now resembled a hollowed-out shell. Decades of underinvestment, gross political interference, and the exodus of experienced engineers led to a catastrophic collapse in oil production, draining the very wellspring of the nation's wealth and sealing its fate. For Elena Rojas, this spiraling chaos translated into a relentless, exhausting battle for survival. Her small, artisanal bakery, a desperate attempt to create stability amidst the storm, became a daily exercise in futility. Flour, sugar, yeast, the most basic ingredients, were no longer reliably available. She spent endless hours navigating black markets, bartering, and standing in interminable queues, often returning empty-handed. The cost of these essentials didn't just rise, it surged unpredictably, rendering any attempt at pricing her goods a gamble. Her family's purchasing power, once a tangible measure of their hard work, simply vanished into the hyperinflationary abyss. They were forced to rely on sporadic remittances from relatives abroad, or make drastic, painful cuts to their already meager consumption, a slow starvation of dignity. This wasn't merely economic hardship for Elena. It was a profound psychological assault, a brutal shattering of her most deeply held convictions. The dissonance between her ingrained belief that doing everything right, studying diligently, working tirelessly, saving responsibly, would guarantee a stable future, and the harsh reality unfolding around her, became an agonizing internal conflict. Her engineering skills, once her pride, were now obsolete in a decimated industrial landscape. Her life savings, painstakingly accumulated over decades, had evaporated into worthless paper. The future she had meticulously planned for her children, a trajectory of upward mobility and security, had simply vanished, replaced by an unsettling void. The question gnawed at her, a constant, tormenting echo. Was it all for nothing? You see, Elena represented millions who believed in a social contract, where effort begot reward and meritocracy paved the way. Now, that contract was not just broken, it was violently torn apart, leaving her with a deep sense of structural betrayal. The rules she had lived by, the principles that had guided her entire life, were systematically dismantled by forces she couldn't comprehend or control. This wasn't a personal failure, it was a systemic one, yet she bore its crushing weight. The quiet assurance that tomorrow would resemble today, the very predictability she cherished, began to crumble into dust. This daily battle against despair, fueled by a visceral need to understand why her country, once so promising, had collapsed, became her new, unwanted routine. If you're finding this analysis as revealing as we are, and you want to understand the deeper forces shaping our world, the ones nobody explains until the very end, then subscribe to this channel now. Join a community that seeks truth beyond the headlines, because the next critical lesson is waiting. The regime, now facing not just economic collapse but widespread internal unrest and intensifying international sanctions, responded with the cold, calculated logic of political survival. Their priority was no longer the welfare of the people, but the preservation of power, an objective pursued through intensified repression and an increasingly authoritarian grip. Protests, once a vibrant expression of dissent, were violently suppressed. Political opposition leaders were systematically jailed, exiled, or silenced, their voices extinguished. Media censorship tightened its suffocating hold, ensuring that the official narrative, however disconnected from reality, remained unchallenged. This was the chilling mechanism of a state abandoning any pretense of democracy, choosing brute force over dialogue and control over consensus. The consequence was a hemorrhage of human capital. The professional and educated population, those who once built and sustained the nation, began a mass exodus, a desperate flight from a country that offered no future. Over 7 million Venezuelans, representing more than a quarter of the population, have emigrated since 2015. This wasn't just a demographic shift, it was a severe brain drain, emptying universities, hospitals, and industries of their most vital assets. Critical labor shortages emerged across all sectors, from healthcare to agriculture, further crippling any remaining productive capacity. The economy, already contracting dramatically, lost the very human ingenuity and skill needed for any hope of recovery. The nation was literally losing its future, one departing citizen at a time. For Elena, this collective exodus struck closest to home. Her eldest child, a promising university student, made the agonizing decision to emigrate to Colombia, seeking opportunities that simply no longer existed in Venezuela. This wasn't a choice made lightly. It was a wrenching separation, leaving Elena with a profound, aching sense of loss. The stark realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The future she had envisioned, meticulously planned, and tirelessly worked for her children within Venezuela, had been utterly erased. It was a future stolen by systemic forces. The social fabric, already strained by scarcity and despair, frayed further, as families were torn apart by borders and economic desperation, leaving a generation separated by circumstance. The critical decision point, the moment that sealed Venezuela's tragic fate, wasn't a single event, but a sustained, unwavering commitment by the Maduro regime to double down on its existing state capture model and repression. This period, roughly between 2014 and 2016, was the true crucible. Global oil prices had collapsed, and clear economic indicators screamed of impending hyperinflation and chronic scarcity. The nation stood at a stark crossroads: pursue genuine reform and liberalize the economy, or cling to power through authoritarianism and economic destruction. The regime, prioritizing political survival over the welfare of its people, chose the latter. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate choice, a conscious decision to sacrifice the nation's economic future for the sake of ideological purity and entrenched power. Genuine, market-oriented reforms, a liberalization of crippling exchange controls, and the restoration of central bank autonomy were all viable paths. These measures could have diversified the economy, preserved a functional private sector, and maintained institutional integrity, potentially averting the catastrophic human cost now unfolding. But such reforms would have demanded ceding power, challenging corrupt networks that thrived on the existing system, and, most unpalatably, admitting the abject failure of their ideological model. These outcomes were deemed unacceptable. The cost of this lost opportunity was immense and irreversible. Once hyperinflation became deeply entrenched, the productive base decimated, and millions had emigrated. The path to recovery became exponentially more difficult. Trust vanished, the social contract broke, and the economy spiraled into a death spiral from which even massive external aid would struggle to rebuild. The evidence of this engineered destruction isn't buried in obscure reports. It's etched into the very landscape of Venezuela, a stark, undeniable reality. You've seen it in the ghost towns of once thriving industrial zones, the silent factories where machines lie rusting, remnants of a forgotten era. Thousands of private businesses, from the largest corporations to the smallest corner shops that once hummed with life, have either shuttered their doors, drastically scaled back operations, or simply fled the country in search of sanity. Iconic Venezuelan brands, symbols of national pride and economic prowess, have vanished from shelves, replaced by imported goods or an ever-present void. This wasn't an unforeseen side effect. It was the direct, logical outcome of a system designed to systematically dismantle its own productive capacity, a self-inflicted wound. You saw Elena's son leave, but imagine this personal heartache multiplied by millions, a national hemorrhage of human capital. More than 7 million Venezuelans, representing over a quarter of the entire population, have emigrated since 2015. This isn't just a demographic shift. It is a profound, irreversible brain drain. Universities, once vibrant centers of learning, now stand half empty. Hospitals struggle without doctors and nurses. Industries, starved of their most vital assets, are left with gaping holes in expertise. These are not merely statistics. They are lives uprooted, families torn apart, a nation losing its future, one departing citizen at a time, validating the thesis that such deliberate choices lead to this very exodus. The nation's economic heart, once vibrant with the pulse of oil wealth, now barely beats, a testament to the system's engineered collapse. Venezuela's gross domestic product has contracted by an astonishing 75% since 2013, a collapse virtually unprecedented in modern history, eclipsing even wartime devastation. Oil production, once the envy of the world and the bedrock of its prosperity, plummeted from over 3 million barrels per day to a mere 600. Crippled by neglect and mismanagement. For those still clinging to their jobs, real wages have collapsed to mere dollars a month, if that, dissolving purchasing power and driving widespread poverty, a brutal redefinition of what it means to survive in a once rich land. The middle class, once the engine of society and a beacon of stability, has been virtually eradicated, swallowed whole by hyperinflation and economic despair. Basic public services, once a given, became a luxury, then vanished entirely. Electricity flickers sporadically, water runs dry for days, and healthcare systems have deteriorated to catastrophic levels, leading to the resurgence of preventable diseases and widespread malnutrition. This is not the accidental misfortune of a nation. It is the chilling, verifiable outcome of a system that deliberately prioritized political control over the well-being of its people, confirming that the collapse was not unforeseen, but a meticulously constructed tragedy. If you're finding this analysis as revealing as we are, and you want to understand the deeper forces shaping our world, the ones nobody explains until the very end, then subscribe to this channel now. Join a community that seeks truth beyond the headlines, because we will continue to dissect the silent ruptures that reshape nations, providing clarity on these structural patterns and their unfolding consequences. Future generations will inherit a deeply indebted nation, its productive base decimated, its social fabric torn, and its collective psyche scarred by profound trauma. They will face the monumental challenge of rebuilding trust in institutions that systematically betrayed them, reestablishing a work ethic eroded by years of scarcity, and overcoming a corrosive legacy of systemic corruption and dependency. The lost generation of professionals, those who fled in search of opportunity, will leave a permanent, aching gap in human capital and expertise, a void that will take decades, if not centuries, to truly fill. Venezuela, once a pivotal regional player and a key global oil producer, has been reduced to a geopolitical pawn, its sovereignty compromised by its economic fragility and reliance on strategic alliances for mere survival. Its economic and political relevance has dwindled to little more than its residual oil reserves, a stark contrast to its former stature. The traditional social model, once anchored by a relatively strong middle class and a functional state, has been replaced by a highly stratified society. A small elite benefiting from state control and illicit activities, and a vast majority struggling in extreme poverty, a broken promise. This story powerfully illustrates that the true collapse of a nation is not merely the depletion of its financial resources, but the systematic erosion of the institutional and productive structures that generate wealth and sustain human dignity. Venezuela's trajectory is a stark universal pattern. A regime can prolong its political existence long after it has economically destroyed its own people, by substituting genuine economic activity with state capture, propaganda, and repression. The most dangerous illusion is the belief that political control can endlessly defy economic gravity, and the ultimate cost is borne by generations who inherit a hollowed-out nation, where the system survives not for its efficiency, but by consuming its own future.